Hello and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And we are back with another week of college basketball review. And as we get closer to March Madness, that is, oh boy, it is heating up. It's getting awful hot in the world of college basketball. There's a lot to cover. So let's keep this intro nice and short and just jump right into it. So Tim, are you ready to run it?
Let's run it.
All right. So as always, the first thing we're going to do is go over the AP poll every week. And there's not a lot of movement at the top. You know, just Gonzaga, Arizona, Baylor, they're staying put at 1, 2, 3. Auburn jumps up a spot to number 4. Kentucky jumps up 2 to number 5. Kansas stays put at number 6. Duke, they fell 3 after a strange week. More on that later in the episode. Nova up 3, Tennessee up 4, and Purdue falls down to 1, and they'll round out the top 10. So any other notable risers and fallers that you can see, Tim?
I'd say two of the biggest ones are two big risers, with UCLA moving up 4 spots to number 13 and Illinois moving up 4 spots to number 16 are two big teams on the rise with some pretty statement wins going into champ week.
Yeah, I mean, UCLA, they had wins against USC. That was a big rivalry game. And Illinois, they had that huge shootout against Iowa. Tennessee also raised 4 spots for their gritty win at home against Arkansas. Some of the biggest fallers you see is that USC team. They lost twice. Granted, it was against Arizona and at UCLA, but still, if you lose multiple games in a week, you're going to fall a little bit. Houston, although they beat Cincinnati, they lost to Memphis by quite a bit. And Duke, they lost to North Carolina. So I think that's a pretty good segue to get into that very same game. And that was a fun one because Coach K that's his final home game after a long storied career, 42 years as Duke head coach. He's all-time winningest head coach in college basketball, 5 national championships. I could go on forever about Coach K. And North Carolina was like, you know, that big old celebration that you're going to have with you and your family and like all your former players there and like everything that you just throw it out the window, throw it away. And
they came to play basketball. They
and UNC smacked them. They smacked them by 13 points. Duke completely fell apart in the second half and down the stretch. They couldn't make shots at all. Their shot selection was absolutely terrible. And Coach K, he put it pretty bluntly afterwards, where it was like, this is unacceptable. We got beat. This is unacceptable. The internet was very, very happy with Duke losing that game to UNC, which was quite hilarious. And I think the bigger picture for North Carolina is they were on the bubble. They're not anymore. They beat Duke by 13 at Durham. They're going to be in the tournament as like a 10 or an 11 seed. They punched their ticket in the ACC.
Yeah, that was a really crucial game for them, putting up 94 points in Cameron Indoor in a regulation game. It's not easy to do, and they really definitely came to play. And like you said, they were pretty iffy on bubble watch of where they might have been if they lost a couple of games heading into Selection Sunday. But really getting that win solidified themselves. I've seen them be solidified anywhere as high as 9 and as low still as 11. But they've pretty much solidified their spot regardless of what they end up doing in this conference tournament.
Yeah, they got a double bye going into the ACC tournament, and they should be fine on Selection Sunday. The next series of games that we're going to get into is something that you highlighted in our Big 12 breakdown with the TCU Horned Frogs. You said what they needed to do in order to secure a spot is win 1 or more of their next games. They took care of business. They did what they needed to do at home, a 10-point win against the Kansas Jayhawks. That was enough for them to pretty much clinch it. And granted, they split that series, but they played Kansas tough in Lawrence on the road. And so because of those 2 games, TCU, they're pretty much in. They're 5th in a strong Big 12. And I would say they are guaranteed, but they lost to West Virginia. I mean, West Virginia's terrible. They're not that good, and they should be fine. I wouldn't be panicking if I was a fan of TCU, but Yeah, just a pretty solid week, taking 1 of 2 against Kansas. That was big for them. They needed it.
Yeah, like you said, it was exactly what they needed to do. Obviously, coming out with a 10-point win at home was very important, but it also showed that on the road they had the ability to continue to play with them. And I think probably a little bit to do with that third game is the loss against West Virginia. Is you have your 2 tough games where they definitely prepared and expended a lot of energy preparing for to play Kansas back to back. And it kind of led them to be surprised a little bit at West Virginia.
Yeah, and that could very much be it. You go into
Yeah.
Morgantown expecting
Most
a
games
big
that
win.
you would expect that they're probably going to be able to pull out that win, but it certainly doesn't take that much away from earlier on in the week. So I feel like they're still pretty solid in their spot in the tournament.
Yeah, for sure. After that, we're going to take a trip to the great state of Indiana. And Tim, you were at this game. You were at Mackey on Saturday. Indiana and Purdue goes down to the wire again. This time, Purdue takes the victory 69-67. And big scare for Purdue. Tim, what was it like being at that game?
I mean, it was a crazy environment. I loved being there. It was absolutely insane. The crowd was going all night long. But props to Indiana, of course, for keeping it close. Once again, they've got a very solid defense on that team. In fact, I believe it's actually the best ranked defense in the Big Ten for this season. And they did hold Purdue on a lot of different avenues. Eric Hunter Jr. came up so huge down the stretch, hitting shots for them left and right all over the court, being a real strong presence at point guard that they needed, having 17 points. And then you get 15 out of Sasha Stefanovic. So both of those guys, a lot of those seniors, even Trevion had a solid game of his own. They really did what they needed to do to pull out a win in their last home game in Mackey Arena. So regardless of it being a close win, a win is a win at this stage, and it was a win they very much needed to at least get that decent momentum going into the tournament. So it was very, very solid win for them, even though it ended up being that close.
Yeah, and that's something scary that Purdue has really, that's been one of their weaknesses. When they play a good defense, what are they going to do against it? You saw it against Michigan State where they locked them down and they couldn't escape East Lansing with a win. And IU played them really tough at Mackey. And it's a rivalry game. IU Purdue, you figure it's going to be close in some
very
form
rarely
or fashion.
Is that a blowout game, yeah, regardless of how talented the teams are.
And the 3 players that you mentioned for Purdue, Eric Hunter, Sasha Stefanovic, and Trevion Williams, all had huge baskets down the stretch, which essentially led to their victory. So you're absolutely right. A win is a win is a win in March, like leading up to the conference tournament. And now the bigger picture for Indiana, Purdue, they're fine. Purdue is going to make the tournament. You're not worried about that. Indiana, on the other hand, their ability to not really choke, but just not close out close games.
Yeah, it's the lack of closing out the games that they really need most.
Yeah.
The close losses, it's like, okay, but you need to turn some of those into wins too.
And because of that, their tournament chances are on life support, and Purdue may have just essentially pulled that plug, barring a huge Big Ten tournament. So it'll be interesting for Indiana to see how they respond, but definitely a very, very fun game for you to go to and experience live. Because you get that Indiana basketball environment
it's quite an environment, especially in Mackey of all places.
In college basketball. So after that, we're going to review the SEC game of the week, in my opinion, Arkansas and Tennessee. That was on Saturday. And essentially, it's an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. Arkansas was on fire. So was Tennessee. It was a clash of titans. Who was going to come away with a victory in that one? And in the first half, it seemed like Tennessee was absolutely going to blow them out. And then here comes Arkansas roaring back and making it a game. And Tennessee survived and won 78-74. So the thing that this tells me about the two teams, Tennessee, it was a tale of two halves, right? In the first half, they looked absolutely untouchable, that they could make a run in the SEC tournament and even beyond. And in the second half, the bottom completely fell out and they almost fell apart and almost choked the game. Arkansas, on the other hand, this just proves to me that they're already legit, and that ferocious comeback just proves that they're never out of a big game. They can come back and they can shock you. And the next step is, instead of just coming back, completing the comeback.
Actually finishing, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this Arkansas team is completely capable of doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting game to watch, as you've got two of those teams that have both proven that depending on what part aspect of their game is showing, they both have the ability to play basketball at a really, really high level. And for Arkansas, you kind of saw a little bit of that reality check in the first half, of that they're not always going to be incredibly on fire, but they of course turned that right around in the second half, fighting all the way back. So it does show a lot of promise for that Arkansas team, that just because they're not always knocking down all of their shots doesn't mean that they're just going to give up entirely. And to prove that Tennessee is still very much the real deal as well. They had a very solid performance and even managed to hang on after blowing all of their colossal lead that they built in the first half. So I think it just proves for this game that they're two very tough teams that can play any teams tough, but it all depends on whether or not they're knocking down shots at any given part of the game.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be sleepers to win the SEC tournament, both of them, in a very top-heavy conference that includes powerhouses like Auburn and Kentucky. Don't count out the Vols and the Razorbacks. So then we're going to go to some more Big Ten news. You know, this is a really interesting one, because at the end of the week, I thought Wisconsin had the Big Ten regular season title wrapped up. And then, like I see on social media, you know, some people that go to Illinois, Big Ten regular season champs. And I'm like, okay, let me go find out what happened. Illinois can purely thank Nebraska for their Big Ten regular season title, because Nebraska goes into Madison and stuns Wisconsin, beats them. I mean, granted, Johnny Davis was hurt. He was injured on a flagrant foul that caused him to go to the locker room and not return. It was diagnosed as a lower body injury of some sort. So that was huge. But still, the ability of Nebraska to come back and beat them. Nebraska, watch out for the Huskers. I mean, they've had a pretty good week. They beat Ohio State in Columbus, and then they walk into Madison and win there. So they're on a 3-game win streak going into the Big Ten tournament. So who knows? Nebraska, anybody?
I think very few people are going to take you up on that one. But in terms of, I
mean, it would be exciting if Nebraska went on to like make it interesting in the Big Ten.
It would be wild. But at the same time, I mean, I will say they were runners up. I would say they're runner-up for my team of the week, because they obviously played two very good games. But yes, I think a big part of this game is losing Johnny Davis down the stretch really hurt Wisconsin. They had other guys step up and score the ball pretty well, but it's pretty much invaluable to lose a guy like that, even for part of the game. I think we still haven't necessarily heard an exact timetable on the potential return for him, whether that will be Big Ten tournament or beyond, maybe into the NCAA when he's aiming for a return. But I mean, yeah, Nebraska all of a sudden has decided that they kind of figured out how to play basketball pretty well. And I mean, good for them, but it's kind of a little too late, unless they obviously, like you said, do a massive showing in the Big Ten tournament.
But then again,
it certainly made the standings. It certainly made the standings interesting.
I mean, better late than never. And back to the Johnny Davis injury. If Wisconsin misses Johnny Davis for an extended period of time, then my Wisconsin Big Ten champion pick is in danger of just blowing up in my face, because the loss of a Johnny Davis is invaluable for a team like Wisconsin. But because Nebraska suddenly decides, hey, we know how to play basketball and win a few games, that put the importance on Illinois and Iowa in Urbana-Champaign. And Illinois, they were down 15 in the first half, and they came all the way back and won and beat Iowa to win their share of the Big Ten regular season title. I mean, shoot, you got Kofi Coburn, because again, the sports world knows him as Coburn. So fine, I guess I'll relent. Kofi Coburn had 21 points and 14 rebounds in the victory, and he was huge. Illinois down the stretch, they came up when they needed to beat Iowa and claim that championship.
Yeah, I mean they've proven all year long why they're one of the premier teams in the Big Ten, and all they did was kind of just close out the season on the right note and prove why they're still right there.
Drip.
Obviously, they lost 2 games to Purdue down the stretch, which obviously hurt them big standing wise, but they did exactly what they needed to do in holding out in that game. Obviously, Kofi Coburn is a beast down low, and it's hard to stop him on any given day. And Iowa, of course, is not exactly a team built for stopping big men. So he basically he had his night, and it was enough to pull out a win against them and secure that share of the Big Ten championship.
Yeah. So, hey, good for Illinois. They've won 3 straight and they get the 1 seed going into the Big Ten tournament. Speaking of tournaments, even though this next week upcoming is championship week, there are still some teams that have punched their tickets to March Madness, including Murray State in the Ohio Valley, Longwood, the Lancers win the Southern Conference, Missouri Valley, Loyola, they ended up winning. So, Tim, congratulations. Your pick worked out. Although I will say, if Missouri State ends up beating Drake, and that was because of shenanigans or whatever, I think Missouri State goes dancing.
It could have been a very
I think Missouri State goes dancing instead of Loyola, but that's neither here nor there. I digress. The SoCon Chattanooga Mocs, in a game for the ages, defeats Furman in overtime, and David Jean-Baptiste just hits a game winner to remember for a lifetime. Over 2 defenders, 40-footer, just up and away, and that's going to be a March memory that will last for David Jean-Baptiste. And in the Sun Belt, Georgia State is going dancing there. So you got a couple teams that have already clinched. The rest will take place next week. So we'll see how those turn out. So now we're going to everybody's favorite segment in this episode, Tim's Teams of the Week. Tim, who you got for your team?
Like I said, the Nebraska Cornhuskers came up real short. I really wanted to give it to them because they obviously had an incredible week with those 2 wins and whatnot. But I want to take a little bit of the Big Ten bias out of it because obviously it's the league that I pay attention to the most. So in terms
you talk about the Big Ten plenty.
Exactly, which is why for this team of the week, I turned my attention over to the UNC Tar Heels. And of course, they have their massive win over Duke at Cameron Indoor. Not just a win, but they gave up 81 points, which most times you give up 81 points to Duke, it's like, oh man, it's going to be a real tough to win. They put up 94. So they had a really, really solid game. And obviously it was important to win that massive of a game in terms of rivalry game, Coach K's last game, the hype surrounded by it. But it also, like we talked about, solidified themselves in the tournament, going into the ACC tournament, regardless of whatever they do. So that was a really important week for them and a really important game to help solidify themselves in the NCAA tournament. So they were not by far, but my team of the week this week.
Yeah, I mean, to go into Cameron Stadium and against Duke with emotionally charged Cameron Crazies, no less, because your coach...
There was a lot of emotion that night.
Oh my goodness. And for North Carolina to hang 94 on them definitely stamps a well-deserved Tim's Team of the Week. Also, not to mention, they defeated Syracuse in overtime by 9 points. So that was another victory that they had earned. So, but that's not to take... North Carolina, fantastic week. So now we're going to turn it over to Tim's team to look out for. Who you got there?
Yeah, so you know how I talked about trying to sway away from the Big Ten bias? Yeah, we're going to throw that out the window because my team of the week, my team to look forward for this week
is it a Big Ten team?
You betcha. University of Michigan. The reason that this week is so important for Michigan is the fact that they are currently very firmly on bubble watch. They're either just around the very last team in or just around the first team out. So they're right on that bubble. They're heading into the Big Ten tournament where in their first game, they match up with the Indiana Hoosiers, who once again are also on bubble watch. So that game is going to be massive in terms of the output of where some of that shuffling could be in those last teams in. And the other thing that's really big for them is they finally get head coach Juwan Howard back after his suspension for the rest of the regular season after, throwing a little hands in that at the end of that Wisconsin game.
1-2, 1-2.
So in those 5 games that they were Juwan Howard-less, they went 3-2, won some decent games and lost a couple iffy ones. So I think it'll be very important to see how they respond to getting him back and whether that will help the overall morale, the way the team runs, everything about this team's identity going into that game and what kind of Big Ten tournament run they hope to make.
Yeah, this next week is going to be huge for Michigan. I mean, now that I'm back home, talk to my old man, big Michigan fan. He's a lot more confident than you or I are that they're going to make the tournament. But hey, who knows? You got to have faith in your team. And this week is definitely going to be a big one for the Wolverines, who, as you mentioned, returned Juwan Howard, which is huge. But we'll see how that plays out. And I think that's all we got for this week's college basketball recap. The train don't stop as we get into March. It is just rolling on, and we're going to keep rolling through into conference championship weekend, selection Sunday, and eventually the tournament. So we can't wait for all of that and more.
Real exciting.
So until next time, like and subscribe for more Running the Table content, and we out.